Welcome back. It is now week 4, and we are still continuing on our journey to review all of Marzano's 41 traits of becoming a reflective teacher, effective teaching traits. So today's trait, the first one of 3, would be concerning with itness, and the specific trait is the teacher uses behaviors associated with itness to maintain adherence to rules and procedures in response to the question, what do I typically do to demonstrate with itness? And although with itness seems like it should be a really common sense term, and it is, but it actually is derived from an evidence-based practice from a researcher named Kounin, Kounin, and with itness is something that I would stake my career on also, because I believe not only is it something similar to when you have children say you have eyes in the back of your head as a teacher or a parent, but it is also something about being confident and very aware of your behaviors in the classroom and the behaviors of your students at a level that really can best be demonstrated, by veteran teachers or by teachers who have really practiced this skill. Because I honestly am not sure how it fits into the debate on whether a teacher is born or made, because I feel like this trait is something that some individuals have a difficult time with. So I also have seen great beginning teachers who are just pros at this. So please bear that in mind as you're working to observe this in teachers and as you're working on your own element of with itness in your practicum experience. So some of the teacher evidence that you'll see when with itness is being demonstrated, and yes, I would like you specifically in this trait to reflect upon how I instruct in our class in 376, because I hope that you will see the evidence of this in particular in how I manage our classroom. So the first one is the teacher physically occupies all quadrants of the room, and I do explicitly attempt to make myself present in all quadrants of the room. And that's one of the reasons that I like to have someone up front helping to lead the class and have a lot more student engagement, because it, again, provides me with a method of being able to get around the room. So proximity control is what that's related to. And I just think that it makes students feel more connected when you are near them in the classroom. They feel more comfortable asking you questions maybe on the side that they wouldn't ask if you were at the front of the room and farther away from them. But that is the first piece of teacher evidence that I would be looking for with itness. Our teachers circulating throughout the room and not ignoring one particular area, which is difficult to do because you all kind of have a natural teaching side that you lean to, and you don't really notice that until you've been in a classroom for a while, but you'll tend to look more to the left or more to the right. And you have to force yourself to do that, as well as the second part of teacher evidence, which is the teacher scans the room, making eye contact with students on a consistent basis. And I do attempt to do that also, and it is a challenge because until those behaviors are ingrained and automatic for you, it is a conscious thought that you have to make. Have I moved to the left side? Have I moved to the right? Have I looked at that individual? Have I looked at this individual? So you kind of have to force yourself to do that while still keeping your train of thought regarding the course of instruction that you're presenting. So the teacher will recognize potential sources of disruptive behavior and deal with them immediately. So, what I love in the actual book is they talk about all the moments where I think you might remember them, even if you weren't part of the disruptions. But you remember when you were in elementary school and you would hear students giggling across the room, or see them, kind of whispering to one another when the teacher would turn her back, his or her back, and you knew something was up, or maybe the student that every time the teacher turned his or her back, they would throw that spitwad, across the room, or poke the girl in the seat in front of them. And you knew it was going on, and maybe you were demonstrating more with itness than the teacher was, and then you see a teacher turn around, what's going on? Who's doing what? I need to know what you're doing. Well, if you demonstrate with itness, you never have to ask that question usually, because you are so aware of what's going on around you that you're able to identify potential sources of disruption and sort of head them off at the pass. So, which there are some elements of this that do not belong in the discrete category of withedness. They belong in how you respond to adherence to rules and procedures or a lack of compliance with rules and procedures. So I'm going to try to continue to focus this particular video just on the awareness concept. Additionally, the teacher will proactively address inflammatory situations. So, one of the examples that the book gives is you sort of get to know the students after a day or two that might create a scenario in class where they could disrupt the lesson. So, you try to plan your lessons not in a way that changes what you attempt or you're attempting to do in terms of instructional impact, but in a way that if you need to, you can provide sort of some upfront conversation with an individual who you think might be disruptive to the lesson and provide them with some additional support, some encouragement, a reminder of the expectations, and you're going to proactively address those things. Or another good example is I can think of maybe in my middle school classroom when I knew there was a student in the class who didn't read well. He had some decoding issues, and again, this is middle school, but it definitely still happens there. Had some decoding issues, so I knew in advance that when I started an activity where I was going to ask students to read aloud, and no, I do not mean just going around the room round robin and read aloud, but perhaps unknowingly, or unsuspectingly, they're going to be called on to read. Well, I knew which students could handle that and which ones couldn't. And I also knew that the one student who really, really became distressed whenever it was his turn to read, I needed to provide a way for him to know in advance when it was going to be his turn to read. So I developed a system to work with him prior to class and any situation where we were going to be reading aloud, where he knew that if I came to stood by his desk without saying a word, if I came to stand by his desk while another person was reading, that the next person up to read was going to be him. So he knew that I would break paragraph reading apart, and so he would be the next paragraph, and that gave him an opportunity to sort of look ahead and be ready to read. Or I would give him a modified expectation of reading, where maybe I would say in advance, let's see, in this next paragraph, all I really need to know is the word in the third line. It seems like it's the most important word for us. Let's see, third line, everyone, where are we? And then I would take the group through the activity that maybe normally I would ask an individual to look for. And then again, when I came to stand by that student, he knew that he was going to be the one that I would call on next. So a lot of those things you can do will show up in student evidence, where students will they'll recognize that you're aware of their behavior. You're going to see students that their body language changes when you come near them. They might stop talking when you come near them. They might actually get back on task in terms of if they were maybe playing with their pencil. They're actually, without prompting, they're going to go ahead and if they see you look at them, if you go stand near them, they're going to start working again. So that evidence of the students knowing that you are with it is again going to be displayed with the whole, the teacher has eyes in the back of her head discussion, or his in the back of his head. And what that leads to is what is a crucial element of classroom management. And I had a request from some students asking me to make sure that we could talk about classroom management in relationship to special education students, and asking, are there any differences between working with a student with special needs or a student who is part of the general education population typically? And my answer would be, I think behavior is behavior, and you see lots of different behaviors, and they're performed for many different reasons. That's called the function of the behavior. And you just have to be really quick with your with itness and be able to quickly understand why a student's doing what he or she does, and then provide an appropriate response from the framework of the least intrusive intervention framework. So if you have not yet heard of that, it speaks of moving from a nonverbal intervention toward a verbal intervention, and then to placing a demand, then to providing consequences for a student. So within that framework, you always have to start with a nonverbal unless the intensity of the situation requires you, for the safety of yourself and others and the students, to move more quickly to a demand and consequence scenario or just a verbal. So rather than speak of all of that in the with itness category, I'm going to refer you back to an article that I think is a total of 2 to 3 pages in length with only the center of the page being used. But it's an article called The Response Hierarchy, regarding the response hierarchy, and it is posted in Blackboard under course tasks and related resources. It's maybe the fifth or sixth item down on that page. And again, it's the response hierarchy article. And that article is imperative to you understanding how classroom management interventions work, and imperative to you being able to observe a teacher effectively and perform the same behaviors yourself that move you along on that response hierarchy continuum. So again, the 4 levels are: begin with nonverbal interventions. And if you are a with it teacher, as you move about the room, your nonverbals and proximity control are going to take you farther than verbals will any day. And then your second level would be your verbal interventions, where you actually need to perhaps use a student's name or intervene with just a clarification of rules. Again, starting with nonverbal, moving then to verbal. And then if you have to, move forward into a demand sequence where you need to directly address a student and say, I do expect students to respond to my directives when I've asked for you to put your science book in your desk and get out your social studies book. Please do so now. That's a demand. But then if you have to, if you're not getting where you need to go with subtle private demands such as that, then you might need to move to a consequence phase where your demand is accompanied with that consequence. I've asked you to get your book out twice now. John, please get your book out, or you'll be moving to room, 120 to meet with the classroom assistant. I don't know what scenario you've got. And then when that doesn't happen, John, I've asked you twice now to get your social studies book out. I've offered a chance for you to talk to the assistant. You've not complied, so it's time to move to the office. Now, that was a lot wordier than it needs to be, but we can discuss some of these scenarios as you observe them in your practicum settings, and then you bring them back to class to talk about, because that's the best way to learn. So observe, analyze, compare the teacher evidence you see in your teachers to that which you're performing yourself also within the teacher evidence and student evidence category. And if you choose this goal, I'm telling you, it'll go far, but the next 2 are directly tied to it, and I know you can't wait to watch them. Thank you.